Pricing. I always like to start here because I think it gets lost in the mix when we talk about optimization. The pricing at AWS is pay as you go, right? We launch things, they're on demand. While it's running, you're paying for it, whether it be per hour, per second, per month. And one of the biggest kind of opportunities around AWS is, can you turn it off? Can you make it smaller? Can you schedule it so it just runs during the week and turns off on the weekends? And this is the big, I guess, allure for people that were moving to the cloud is, do we need to do the CapEx way where we went and bought a server that we paid all that money up front and now it's just sitting in a room? Or can we pay for a virtual server that's just out on AWS running for a little bit, and when we're done with it, we can turn it off? And it can be just the right size, right? We don't got to take a guess and say, hey, we just need that monster server. So keep pay as you go in mind, because I think that gets overlooked, right? This is the OpEx benefit of the cloud. This is why so many people use it. I'll be walking around a lot, so if you're going to have to look around me, just tell me. So save when you commit. That's kind of the second pillar. And that's where, it was mentioned with Real Cloud and other stuff, the savings plans, the RIs. These are commitments where our customers say, you know what, I know for sure I'm going to have this stuff running for the next year or the next 3 years. I'm willing to make that agreement with you to get a better price. So we have those constructs for a number of services, and they're, can be a very powerful way to save money as well if you know it's going to be a workload that's sticking around. And then the last tier is pay less by using more. So some of our services are tiered. S3, for example, the more gigs you have stored out there, eventually you will hit other tiers to where the pricing per gig comes down. CloudFront is another example of that. So some of our services operate on that model. It may not apply to the scale of everybody in this room, but it is something to consider as your organization grows, that there could be a target out there that'll save you money automatically. It's nothing you have to do. It's just a benefit that you using that much more of AWS, you save a little more. All right, billing console. So this is the first most rudimentary tool that we have when it comes to getting visibility into what you're spending. I often describe billing console as, this is for your accounts payable people mostly, right? Whoever's paying the bill, they're going to want to look at this, because what this allows them to do is drill down into the services, to the accounts, and see what we're being charged. One of the unique things, though, in billing console that doesn't exist in some of our other tools is it'll go back as far as you've been using AWS. So some of our other tools that I'll mention in the future, Cost Explorer and things, they'll only go back 12 months. Well, billing console will go back to the very, very first day that you've started using services, so it can be very, very valuable when you need that historic data. The second thing that is super useful about billing console is a little button in the top right corner that's download CSV. It gives you a very detailed, like kind of line by line breakout of the usage, and it's a good starting point for somebody that's pivoting from like, I just want to roughly understand the bill, to I need to start doing some like nitty gritty analysis. That's a great first step to grab that button. But most of what people do in here is understand it, POs, credits, things along those lines that'll be largely accounting functions. Tagging and cost categories. So this is the first construct that we have. And again, these things are all free. I'll try to mention along the way if something has a cost. These are a way to logically organize the things that you have running in AWS. So let's say you're a company and you've got a program running in a couple different accounts. For some reason, it's spread across 3. Maybe you have your prod, your dev, QA. Well, to report on that, it can be complicated because maybe only a portion of that account is used by your program, the one that you make. But your boss or your accounting department wants to know, how much is it costing us to run that program? We really need to know so that we can figure out if it's even profitable. Well, tags are unique in that aspect, because you could go and tag that application and say, this is, hey, Adam's application. And I could go find those pieces in different places and I'll say these are all Adam's application. And the neat part about that is then they'll roll up to the reporting automatically. Nothing that has to do. The accounting or management or whoever can start grouping that down and seeing what's there to be able to report on it. There's a lot to it, right? There's a lot of best practices around it. There's a lot of ways to do it well. There's a lot of ways to do it awful. Tags are case sensitive. So some people, not knowing that on the front end, will put Adam's application with a capital A. Some people will put it in all lowercase. Well, now those are 2 tags. Not the end of the world. You can group them together and still report on them, but it gets messy really fast if you don't know that kind of stuff. So it's important to establish some kind of best practices around that on the front end. And I put a link in the bottom. You can find it out there on the web pretty easy, just AWS tagging best practices. We published an update just February this last month, so it's pretty fresh with some of the things that we put in there. around governance and restrictions and things you can do with tagging. So if this is your world and something that you care about, definitely go take a look at that. Let's see, cost categories. Cost categories are another way of grouping data to look at it. So the best example I can give about cost categories is, let's say you had 3 different accounts that were, again, all one application. Well, tagging can get complicated because you have to go inside each account and tag all the resources, the EC2 instance, the S3 bucket, everything that's in there. That's a lot, can be a lot. Cost categories, if we know it's something logical, like those 3 accounts represent Adam's application, I can create a category, say that those 3 accounts are that, and it automatically group it. No more work needed. Anything that gets spun up in there is part of it. Anything that gets shut down there is gone from it. So cost categories, very useful in that way. And then one kind of the lesser known things, with tags, if you set up a tag today, you'll get the reporting on that going forward, but you don't get any historical on that. With cost categories, you can set it up and it'll go 12 months like in the past. So that can also be very useful from a reporting and organization perspective. All right. If you tag an instance today, it's only going to report on that tag with that instance today going forward. But if, yeah, there you go. Yeah. Yeah, so cost categories is different than tags. You create a cost category out of things like linked accounts or tags. You can include that too. So like a generic construct where you group things together into what's considered a category, and it'll report on it not only today and going forward, but you can also make up to 12 months back. So valuable when you're trying to understand where something's been and where it's going. So that's also a reason why that it's important to set up like tag early, tag often. You want to get that stuff going as fast as possible because otherwise you don't have the historic context. Yeah, good question, thanks. So Cost Explorer is our visualization tool. So this is again free, it's built in, and this is where, okay, I want to start diving in a little deeper. I want to figure out what's going on with my cost. I want to understand like what are the top services that a certain account's using or a certain tag. And this is what the interface looks like. I know we don't have a ton of time, so I won't spend like going through every piece of it. But basically you can slice and dice the data down to do your investigation, to report on something that's valuable to your business. And it's our free like visualization tool. The things that are important to know in here, though, is the filters on the right, that whole right bar, that restricts the data that's being shown. So you can filter by, like, I just want to see things from a certain region. I just want to see things that are of a certain instance type or a certain service, like just show me EC2. That's your filters. The grouping, that bar that goes kind of horizontally just under the 2 and 3 red box, the grouping is how it groups the data that's being displayed on the screen. So you can group it, right now it's showing it by instance type. Kind of interesting. Maybe you want to see, like in this case, M5s are pretty high on the list, but there's a bunch of others. But you may want to group by linked account or region. It'll help you surface things like, oh wow, it looks like the majority of our spend is in US East 1. Maybe we need to think about diversifying and putting some stuff in other regions. Just that's some of the types of things you can analyze here. It's often more powerful than people recognize. There's a lot of questions and answers you can solve with Cost Explorer. The other useful element is whatever you've got saved on the screen, it can not only be saved as a report, you can just bookmark the link and get right back to it, or you can save it in the interface. But you can also export the table data to a CSV and then do whatever reporting you want, right? You got some fancy Excel formulas that you want to run, you want to create your own graph, just snag the data and go do it, right? And then some people that are kind of maturing in their journey want to forecast. They want to figure out where's this going in the future. Like if we were to analyze kind of where we've been, like what are my costs going to be 6 months from now? And Cost Explorer has some business intelligence that'll automatically do that crunching for you and project out into the future to tell you where you might be cost-wise. I see a lot of organizations starting to do this more. The one thing that this doesn't factor in though is what are some of those projects that are in flight, right? That they haven't told accounting team about. This won't factor in that, of course, but it will go based off of your history. And then lastly, we're kind of like all things at AWS, always changing. This is the new interface for Cost Explorer that's coming out. It has all the same fields. This is becoming the new normal. They just shifted them all off to the right-hand side to give more space for the graph, but same stuff. All right, savings plans and reserved instances. So I talked about this a little bit earlier when it came to commitments, right? Commitments will save you more as you kind of get out into the future and are willing to commit. One of the big things that we see with some of our customers, though, is they made a commitment, they're saving money, out of sight, out of mind, it's done. Wash their hands, they got that savings, there's nothing else to do. Well, the problem is in 1 or 3 years, it's gonna come up for renewal. And if you forget about it, you're gonna be wondering all of a sudden, why am I spending like way more on EC2 than I was yesterday or last month? And that's oftentimes because people miss the expirations on that commitment because it's a year or 3 years out and you don't need to think about it anymore. Well, in the interface for savings plans or reservations, just you set up an alert subscription. If you have them, go make sure you have this set up. If you know the person that set them up, go make sure they have this set up because then you won't miss it. You can get an alert, 7, 30, 60 days out. So then you could start talking to your teams like, do we need to renew this? Do we need to renew a bigger one, smaller, whatever? Then you got time to kind of get ahead of it because you really want to be proactive with those things because once it does expire, that's lost savings, right? Savings you've left on the table. We won't go through everything here, but 2 pillars to understand with commitments is utilization and coverage. So on this prior slide, there's kind of the utilization and coverage reports in each of those sections, which will show you that data. But what you want to know about those is that if you make a commitment, ideally you want it 100% utilized, right? You want that commitment to be being used by the workloads that are there. Because if it's not, you made a commitment for something that's not really being used, right? So that's utilization. That's one of the 2 things that we want to kind of keep an eye on. And there's stuff you can set up to alarm on that too, but getting a little deeper. Coverage is, okay, of all the EC2 I have running, how much of it is it being covered by a commitment, like a savings plan or RI? And that becomes a big piece of some company strategies because they say like, well, I want to cover like 80% of what I have out there. We'll leave a little headroom because we might turn stuff off, we might go to spot, we might right size some things. So they'll have that goal, but how do you even know how you're tracking against that goal? And that's where those coverage reports kind of come into play. You can see that too, where you're tracking. And that'll fluctuate, right? Some team throws a big workload out there and you were at 80%, well now it's gonna water that down. Now you may be at 70%. So these are some of the things, like if this is your world, and I probably failed to mention this at the beginning, but it's become part of like every customer's world now. Our team, me and then Bhavik, who's in the back with the AWS shirt as well, we'll be here to answer questions after, but we work with some of AWS's largest customers, and it's become their like top item, or at least one of their top items is, how can we save money? We want to reduce our costs with AWS, and we want to do it in a way that can either offset all the new projects that we want to do, or we just want to reduce it because of the economic situation to kind of hedge our bets to keep our company safe. So if you're part of an organization that's starting to think about these things, you're definitely at the tip of the spear because it's now become important for everybody.
So just a quick question. So how do you approach customers who may be wondering how much should be in a savings plan? When is it more advantageous to have a reserve business? Maybe generally, how do you approach that?
Yeah, and Jeff's question was just like, what's our kind of mental model? How do we approach it when people say like, okay, maybe I'm willing to do a commitment. Like, what should I do? Where do I start, right? If you haven't done one before, like the too long didn't read version is, don't bother with RIs if it's for compute, because we have savings plans that give you the equivalent discount, but with more flexibility. So go to use savings plans. And then the 2 choices you then have there are, do I do compute or instance? Compute will automatically look across all the EC2 you have running and find the best discounts and apply in a descending order. So if you know you're not going to have a lot of time to like perfectly maximize this thing, just get a compute savings plan. It'll do it all for you. If you know like, okay, I want deeper discounts and I'm willing to babysit it a little bit, instance savings plans are great because then you can pick a specific instance family. You'll get a little more discount, but now you're kind of married to that family for the next year or 3 years, right? Because if a new family comes out, or if you say, hey, maybe we don't want to use that anymore, we want to go to Graviton, there's a trade-off there then. You have like a small risk. And then really the last bit of the conversation is coverage, right? How high are you willing to put that watermark to cover? In a perfect world, if all of your stuff is running and you know it's going to be running for the next year, cover it at 100%. But if you know you're going to get rid of some workloads, move some stuff to spot, maybe right size some things, you want to leave a little headroom potentially for that to happen so that you can do those things and it not overcommit you. So that's where a lot of people kind of land in that 80% range. But I work with customers that sit regularly at 99%. So it is your business decision more than anything. But safe bet, if you know that stuff's going to be around, shoot for like 80% coverage is kind of the rule of thumb.
I have a few savings plans that I would do. How do I know if I'm getting that like ROI?
Well, an ROI would be like, are you getting benefit from it? And that's your utilization. So you'd want to.
My TAM right now stays. I have 31 savings plans.
Sure.
That's enough. But we are still migrating.
Well, enough is subjective, but if you know you're getting your value out of them, is the utilization report, because that will say, like, of these things that I bought, how well are they being used to get me the discounts that I expected? And that will show you as well the savings that it's either utilization or coverage. One of them will show you the savings that they're producing over the time range that you pick. So you'll want to go into your cost explorer, left-hand bar, savings plans or RI will show you coverage and utilization reports. Take a look in there, because that's odds are that's what your TAM's looking at. And if you have a TAM, schedule a call with that TAM. Ask them, how do you know I'm at a good place? What are you looking at, right? And that's that's what they're there to help with.
Yeah, I'm a TAM, and your TAM should be doing quarterly business reviews.
Yes.
Strategic business review now. And during that review, they'll generate that graph for you, say, here's your savings plans, and here's how much of that savings plan you're using. And that's a perfect opportunity to talk with the account team and the TAM about what your goals are.
Right. For that reason, I have cloud ability. So that guy gives me a way of saying, buy this, buy that. Because he has been doing the math behind the scenes. Then I'm buying it. Now I'm seeing a contradictory statement. You're not getting the enough ROI.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm trying to figure out.
So a couple of the comments here made for the group, if you couldn't hear them, is one comment was made, we have a TAM in the room, said, hey, your TAM should be doing that kind of review with you quarterly. And they should. It's not a guarantee. Some companies don't want it, but most will be. And you'll be checking those things. Just keep sight of them. But that doesn't take the responsibility away from you, right? It's your company, your dollars. Monitor it more often than a quarter if you need to. Go look at the reports. And then in your case, you say, well, there's a discrepancy, right? I'm using cloud ability, and they're telling me I need to buy more, whereas my TAM's telling me not to. That's why I say it's a business decision, right? Unless you're at 100% coverage, there's always room to buy more. But are you willing to take the risk of being at 100% coverage and then finding out, oh, one of those applications that we were running, like, we're going to sunset that. We don't need that anymore. And that goes away, right? So that's the stuff you have to think about. What's my 1-year roadmap? What's my 3-year roadmap? And I feel you're going to chime in, which is very relevant too. Some tools give you the ability to like trade them out, right? And go ahead, jump in.
That would be one of the comments, if I may. Your comment about 80% coverage as a most likely is very interesting. In our customer base, we usually see the clients going between 40 to 60%.
Exactly.
They're more cautious. Probably.
Sure.
They want to allow more room for flexibility.
Especially right now, right? And what he says, seeing 40, 60% being more realistic with the customers that he works with.
Yes. And our approach is by the use of Eco, the tool I was talking about, you can go way much more than that. You can go maybe up to 90. I have a customer that I deal with that says, tell us, I want 100% coverage, because they rely on Eco for a very strong capability to manage those commitments, because it has ways to, if there are some reservations going to waste, because you don't need them anymore, and you're using another family, there are ways to negotiate on the marketplace to do that, right?
My problem is I'm a hospital. I can't bring down any stuff. So it has to be running, even if it has zero. No, of course. Yeah, so I don't know who these patients are working. That's my problem.
So yeah, there's no right answer as you're getting here, right? We all have different answers. We've all seen customers doing different things. And I think it's important to understand your use case, right?
So I have 2 law firms that I work with. I have a finite number as an enterprise rep. I can't even get out the gate with cloud. So one of the questions that I'm glad you mentioned healthcare, because HIPAA, right? They have a really huge concern about anything leaving their premises. So how do I overcome that objection and be able to show them a return like what you just proposed up there?
It's the question though, in regards to regulation and how they can understand that it's going to be safe there, or is it a return of like the value of the dollars?
It's more security.
Okay, yeah.
But certainly you could do legal holds and set parameters in terms of how long data is retained, right? just like they would in their physical environment. But what can I tell a CISO in a law firm that's going to put them at ease? That highly confidential files are in the cloud, or it can be without worry.
I can answer this generally. I'm a cost op world and definitely not compliance. But what I would say is that data, whether it's in AWS or in your own data center, it comes with different risks, right? When it's on AWS's side, we have a shared responsibility model where we, of the cloud, security is our world. In the cloud is businesses, right? So whether it be the back end or the physical security to the actual data center, AWS owns that. If you put a server out there and open the firewall rules to where anybody can get into it, that's on you. And you could just as easily do that in your own data center as you could in AWS. It's not a byproduct of really where it's running. It's just what it's being configured as. Second to that, I would say, is that we have very stringent auditing processes, and we have a tool called AWS Artifact that you can go and pull those SOX reports and all the different things that auditors and compliance would need. And really the third thing I'd add there is that there are healthcare companies running on AWS. So I mean, it's obviously possible. I couldn't tell you like how to do it and how to navigate it in a like safe and secure way, but it's doable for any company to do things in a secure way. But yeah, you'd have to take that up with your security folks, your regulation folks to be able to navigate what the right way to do it is. Yeah, no problem.
Maybe I'll get with you some references.
Yeah, I'll tell you, and at least how we address that.
Perfect. So the next item I wanted to jump into was the cost and usage report. So this is when you've kind of gone a bridge further and then you want to get into like the nitty-gritty billing data. You can turn cost and usage reports on and it'll just drop the billing data on a daily basis, a couple times a day, inside of an S3 bucket, and then you could hook up whatever visualization tool you want. You can run Athena queries against it. So this is like the more advanced, like, okay, I've got the basics down. Now I want to go really deep dive and find like resource level. This is what you'll want to turn on. That does have a cost just for the storage in the S3 bucket. Budgets. All right, so these are alerts that you can set, right? So you can say, hey, I know this account has a certain application running. They submitted a budget. They're only supposed to spend $1,000 a month. You can go in and set an alarm that says, okay, if they spend more than $1,000 at some point in the month, I want an alert to know about it so that I can go reach out to them and find out what's going on. So budgets, very simple tool. There's some tweaks you can do to make it a little more advanced, and there's a lot of creative stuff that people do to get alarms. But even with the savings plans and RI stuff, you can set up budgets that say, hey, if my coverage or utilization drop below a certain level, tell me. I want to know, because then I'm not getting the value that I expected to get, and I need to know why. So these types of things can be those early indicators, and this is free, can be those early indicators that give you something to go look after so that you're not getting bill shock, when the bill comes. So
I think it's also an early indicator you might have some malicious activity.
Could be that too.
Because our customers are like, yeah, but we know what we're doing. Well, what if someone's crypto mining on an EC2 fleet and you find out 30 days later?
Yeah, and you never know, right? Because then maybe your savings plan coverage went way down. And that is a signal. Now we go look into it. Oh, 100 instances have been spun up and it's like way more compute than usual. Well, the outcome there was, in that case, a compromise. It could be something else. Maybe a savings plan expired and you forgot to set up those alerts. Well, now, we've also got an alarm to start our investigation. So yeah, use budgets if you're not. There's a lot of ways you can slice and dice them by usage cost, different things. Again, that's kind of the nitty-gritty that we won't have time for today. Anomaly detection, great tool, free. Turn it on. It'll use AI and ML. It'll look through what it sees as the normal in your account. And if something abnormal happens, it'll alert you. So this is kind of goes like with budgets, you have to set a fixed number, right? You have to say, okay, I know this account's supposed to be at $1,000 a month. Well, with the anomaly detection, you turn this on and it'll just look across services. It'll look across linked accounts. It'll analyze the history of see what's normal. And if it sees something out of normal threshold, seasonal, whatever, it'll alert you. The one thing a lot of people think here is, oh crap, that could be a lot of alerts. And I definitely don't want all those alerts. Like I'll just create an email rule and then they won't matter. You can set thresholds in it, percentage or dollar. So you can say, I want to know something that's over 100% increase and over $500. Because think of the examples there, right? Like EC2 could have went from $1 a day to $2 a day. That's 100% increase. Whoa, anomaly. Yeah, but it's $1 extra a day. Do we really want to get alerted on that? Maybe, but probably not, especially if you're a larger company. So it lets you kind of tune that thing. It'll still record it in the dashboard, but it won't email you and haggle you about it. And then when it does record it in the dashboard, the other useful thing is it'll give you a link to Cost Explorer. So it'll show you kind of where it's seen the anomaly happen with all the filters pre-plugged in. So it gives you a jump start on that investigation so that you can go see kind of what happened and where and why it thinks it's an anomaly. And then the last piece of it is it's tunable. You can go in and say, this was an anomaly, it was valuable, or this wasn't. And it'll actually get better at detecting stuff in your accounts over time. Yeah.
Is government using that?
Is who?
Government. Do you have any
I don't know. I don't work with any government accounts, but it's free for every AWS customer. So
What?
it's free for all AWS customers. So I'm sure, right? Like, you know, if everybody's not using it, they should be, because there's no risk, right? Turn it on. And the biggest, you know, advantage to this is we've seen customers that, you know, somebody changed something in their environment that cost a lot of money, or a crypto compromise or whatever, cost a huge spike, and they didn't see it until they got their bill. Well, that's like, you know, too late to stem the bleeding, right? Like now all the damage has happened, and yeah, then maybe we can fix it. But wouldn't you rather know like the day it started or within a day or two? Like, yeah, for sure, right?
Do you have any governments as a customer?
AWS has, they have GovCloud, which is a whole separate platform that's dedicated to government customers.
Is Hillsborough County one of your customers?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't have like a customer list or anything I could tap into. But AWS does have GovCloud, which is a portion of AWS that's dedicated to government and kind of to your like health thing. They've done things that are for the laws for government and stuff to meet their like strict criteria.
You can find that for me.
Oh yeah, anybody can just go search AWS GovCloud. Yeah, and you'll find a bunch of great resources about that.
Just to answer your question, sir, AWS has an entire organization that's just for public sector.
Yep.
State and local government, so yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And I used to work in government, so I kind of understand where that was. And back in the day, early on, there was still a lot of reticence about, you know, people being able to move and meet those like, you know, requirements. But a lot of these companies have come a long way with that stuff, so it's not quite as much of a concern. Trusted Advisor. So this is our native, like built-in tool that will look across some of the best practices that we see and alert you. It has 5 pillars, as you can see up here. And the one that I tend to live in is cost optimization. But it will look through the services you have running and find things like idle EC2 instances or idle RDS databases. And what its criteria is for things like that is it'll say, hey, you have a database that's out there running, but it has had no connections in the last week or two. There's a good chance it's idle, and you should consider shutting it down or terminating it. So it does that like proactive effort on your behalf to say, hey, these are some things you should check out to try to save you money. The caveat is the like full set of checks is only business and enterprise support. So if you're on like lesser support, you will get some checks, but not the full suite. But keep in mind, if you are at any of those levels, this is a tool you should be at the very least spot checking occasionally, because it will surface some very valuable and often low-hanging fruit savings. So Trusted Advisor. And then for, you know, all those other tiers of things like security and fault tolerance and stuff, those are valuable too, especially right for the security team. You might want to go in there and check that out, because there's other things in there like exposed credentials or weak password, just different stuff that you know, you'd want to look at. Or if you're approaching a service limit that could stop, you know, you from being able to launch things. So best practices, Trusted Advisor, definitely check that out. This is some of what the like checks and what it looks like. You can also exempt checks. So if there's a reason it needs to be flagged, right? Like, oh, that's going to be idle because we have a launch in a month. We pre-built it, it's sitting out there, it's ready to go, but it isn't serving any traffic yet. But stop telling us about it. We don't want to see it in, you know, in the check every month. You can exempt things as well.
Your TAM can also refer matters.
Yes. Yep.
So if your TAM sees something out of flash, so they can let you know.
Yeah, I'll just caveat that and say the good TAMs. Well, yeah, they'll go there. We got a lot of great people, but yeah. Exactly. So yeah, Trusted Advisor is the best practices. So definitely tap into that. It is, you know, a useful tool. There's ways, if you have like a large amount of accounts that all roll up to an organization, at the top level, you can pull a report for all of the accounts in one shot, which can also be helpful. So that way you don't got to do it inside each account. And that's the top one is the organizational view, just lets you grab like a CSV or a JSON file, and it pulls all the checks from all the accounts in the whole org in one shot. So definitely take a peek at that. All right, another free tool, and that was, Trust Advisor pseudo free, right? Some checks are depending where your subscription level is. Compute Optimizer, another free tool. What this one does is it looks at your compute. It looks at the history over the last 14 days, does an analysis, and it says, hey, you've got an instance out there running that could be downsized, right? You made it way too big based on the last 14 days, you could cut it in half or whatever, and it'll suggest what you can downsize it to. So super valuable. It'll also do the opposite. It'll say, hey, you're running really hot on this instance. You might want to consider sizing it up. So its goal is to kind of help you right size things, because back to kind of what I mentioned at the beginning, right? We only want you paying for the right size thing that's bringing value to your business. You don't want to pay for a bunch of extra stuff or a huge server that somebody told you should be running, but wasn't the right one after all. So turn on Compute Optimizer if you're not using it. Another free tool. Hmm?
We went on, I don't know who signed up with my company, but they didn't sign up.
Sure.
Guys bring big boxes, and big boxes of because at some time I keep seeing them.
Right.
They have 100 terabytes of object capacity. That's the minimum requirement.
I have seen that with other customers, not with Splunk, but with where they had a vendor tell them this is the size instance we want you to use. And yeah, and they say like, hey, if you want us to support you, you need to be using that size instance. And in that case, you might be locked in. But what I would at least do is go talk to the vendor or your contact or their support and just say, hey, you told me this on the front end, appreciate it. But now I'm looking at 14 days or whatever of history, and it's saying that we can at least conservatively maybe downsize it a little bit, right? Maybe you don't need to go the whole way to the bleeding edge to where you could risk performance. Maybe you can go halfway or even a quarter of the way. It'll still be savings. But yeah, if in that case it's a vendor that's kind of suggested it, you want to check with them, because otherwise when it's time to go get support, they're going to say, I ain't the right size instance, that's your problem, resize it, and then might have nothing to do with it. We won't get too far into this, but this kind of goes in the beginning where I talked about like the OpEx, CapEx, right? Where you buy a server that's sitting in a data closet because we think that's the capacity that we need. But now we own that capacity and we've like put that money out there and it's going to be there whether we use it or not. And that's a guessing game, right? We either bought too much, we bought too little, but the goal is to have the right amount, and that's where being in the cloud, taking advantage of auto scaling, right sizing things correctly, will make sure that you're just paying for the right stuff. So auto scaling groups, if you're using compute, is going to be one of the things that you'll want to take a look at. This is more like getting into your development people. So if the room isn't that technical, go tell the people that build the things for you, like, are we using auto scaling? And if they're not, find out why. Because what auto scaling will do is all of a sudden at night or during the day when your business is the most busy, it'll start scaling up and adding servers for you. And then the evening day, whenever your business is less busy, it'll start shutting those down. So it'll automatically ebb and flow with the amount of compute that you need to have running out there, as an example. Instance Scheduler is one of my favorite tools. It is not free, but is very, very, very inexpensive to run. You launch a cloud formation and then it sets up some structure for you, or you can do it in Systems Manager. But basically what it lets you do is just tag instances or RDS databases with a schedule. So you could say, hey, make this one business hours. Then what it's going to do is it's going to automatically turn that on and off so that it's running during business hours and off during off hours. So then you don't even have to think about it. And this is perfect for workloads that are like QA, dev, sandbox, things that are not production that don't need to run 24/7. Well, pay as you go, right? Like if you're leaving it running during the weekend when it's not being used, you're paying for it, right? So with Instance Scheduler, you can just throw a tag on it and say, even if it's a conservative tag, with the little margin, and you can say, hey, turn this thing off on a schedule, and it'll take care of it for you. So that one could be, pretty substantial savings, right? In the example, 70%, because, even a work week is 40 hours. If we pad that by a little bit and go 50 hours, there's 160 hours in a week, or, you could knock out a bunch of time there to save a bunch of bucks. And it supports multi-account, multi-region, all that. So this one does have a small cost, but it far offsets the savings of what you would get by turning stuff off. So when you're doing a savings plan, you would not want to commit to things that can be shut off, right? Because when you commit, you're committing per hour for every hour of the next year.
In the saving plan, sometimes they use that how many hours you want to run those things by the month. They buy those saving hours.
Right? But with the savings plans, when you commit to $1 per hour for the next year. It's not variable, right? So you don't want to commit, if it was things that can be turned off, you wouldn't want to commit to the $1 per hour for that whole workload because you'd be trying to cover all of it. You could do it for maybe like a subset of that, right? But most of the time, this is where you leave that headroom, right? This is where that 20% lives that we're not covering because it can be shut down and it's saved in other ways or scaled or whatever. So this is a lot of these things, and Spot and other stuff live in that like area that you're usually not covering. We want to cover steady state. What's the production? What's the things that are always there? That's usually the best place to think about savings plans in our eyes. And then we want to layer those other things in to get even more savings. Storage Lens, somewhat new offering that we have, and it is not necessarily a cost optimization tool, but it can be used as one. It gives you bucket level metrics down to the individual bucket, down to the individual prefix. So you can look for things like, do I get a bucket that has a ton of standard storage and no GET requests? What will that tell us? That's a cold bucket, right? I'm storing a bunch of data and nobody's accessing it. What should I do with that? I can maybe lifecycle it to a cheaper storage class. So Storage Lens has built-in free metrics, and then there are some paid advanced metrics you can turn on. Great to start looking at because it can surface interesting things about your buckets that can be used for savings, data retention, and other stuff. So if you're not using it, that's another good one to look at. I believe it. Yeah, it's a powerful tool, and I think it's an often overlooked tool because it's kind of new. But yeah, definitely take a look at that one. That's great. Good use case. Billing Conductor. Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Yeah. It was running. We had rubrics. We were doing something, and then some failures that we never take anything off.
Right.
$4,000.
Well, and that's if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, right? So as soon as you're unlocking some of the visibility of these tools, now you can decide if I need to go take action on something. And if you save $1 million or whatever, like even if it's a month or over 3 months, like a lot of times in what I do, we take that number and we extrapolate it to an annualized number because that's realistically more accurate to the savings that you probably would have saved had you never even known it existed. Could have been 3 years even, right? So that's awesome. Billing Conductor. So this tool exists. It is paid. This is more for like managed service providers and people that have a lot of accounts and they want to slice down a subset of accounts and then give a person permission to see just that. So Billing Conductor can be enabled at the org level. They pick a grouping of accounts. They set one of them as like the primary, and then that account can see all of those accounts together and like what the bill looks like. One of the other powerful things about this, especially for a managed service provider, is they can layer in things like additional discounts or increases. So they could say, oh, well, you've got a support fee of this, or your EC2 charge is actually 5% more because we're giving you support with it. So this tool tends to be more for them, but it does exist and it can be useful in the cases that are needed, right? Yeah, we're doing good here. All right, visualization and forecasting tools. So last section, couple slides here, and this is where we start to pivot into like the future. Here, let me see if I could get the orange off for you guys. This is my Flux saving my eyeballs at night so that we don't have to hurt them. There we go. I should fix that. Sorry about that. If you don't use that app though, it's a cool one for free on Windows computers. Flux, F-L-U-X. It'll turn it like amber, kind of like your phone and stuff, where it takes the blue light out. So when you're working late at night, when you shouldn't be, won't hurt your eyes as bad. Visualization. So there's a ton of tools out there to visualize. This is one in Grafana where it'll take that same cost data, pull it into a dashboard, let you slice and dice and see it in unique and interesting ways. One of the more popular ones that our team, Optics, originally built and now is being supported and customized by a larger community. And it has these 6 different dashboards that you can deploy. These are paid, pay for QuickSight. It's just pulling in the data, that cost data that's under the hood. but it'll give you trends, resource level granularity. So this is another kind of like tool like your Cloudability and like some of the other ones out there that you can layer in to see like what's going on in my environment. I don't know really what are the things I should be looking at. Can this like show me some of that? Trends is particularly interesting sometimes because month over month, why did my S3 double, right? Like where's that coming from? So a lot of interesting stuff in here, like the Trusted Advisor and Compute Optimizer. Those are just the compiling that earlier data that I mentioned. You can go look at for free, kind of ad hoc. It'll pull it in from all those linked accounts to one, nice dashboard. So not needed if you're already consuming it in a way that makes sense. But if you're, hey, I'm getting a lot of value out of that Compute Optimizer, and I want to go after it, get a lot of savings. It might make sense to use a dashboard like that because it's going to make it more organized. It's going to pull it all in from all those linked accounts, and now you don't got to go kind of spot check in a bunch of places. I like this view. It just shows you a little bit of kind of like less technical to more technical, right? Like who are these dashboards for? Which one should I use? Where should I get started? The trends and cost intelligence tend to be more of that like exec summary. Here's the basics. And then as you want to get more deep into like the resources and other stuff, you kind of keep moving to the right. But it depends on your use case as well. And yeah, don't worry about grabbing pictures. I'll put this into a PDF and drop it in the Slack if you're in there for the group. I'll put it in the Slack for the group. Oh, the cost intelligence dashboards? Yeah, there is, if I didn't put it in here, I will make sure it is at the end. But if you Google as well, AWS cost intelligence dashboards, we have a well-architected lab that's public. And we publish a bunch of like AWS queries. And then we also have all the instructions to set up and deploy this. It's just a cloud formation in a couple steps. And then it's launches inside of QuickSight and ties into your cost and usage reports. And then you got interface. Takes ish 20, 30 minutes to set up, pretty quick.
So the only cost is the use of the underlying services.
Yeah, the only cost is the usage of the underlying services. So there would be the S3 data that's storing your cost and usage report, and then the QuickSight, which is the visual layer. So that's it. Same. Grafana is another visualization platform. You would just be paying the Grafana cost to create those visualizations. So either one.
No, I know what's Grafana. My question is, where do I go and create that? Is it with CloudFormation template?
There is, and again, when I share this deck, that link has all the instructions for it, so I'll make sure to include that. Perfect. And then forecasting is become a really popular item for a lot of FinOps and IT groups. They want to know like, where's our costs going? Can we control them? And I showed you Cost Explorer earlier, which is that top left corner. But we have other tools for forecasts. So inside of QuickSight, which was a lot of those cost intelligence dashboards, this graph over to the right, it supports the ability to forecast data there as well. And it's customizable. You can pick like how far you want to go back in the analysis, how far you want to go into the future, and it'll project that. And then we have a dedicated tool called Amazon Forecast that's highly tunable, like AI ML model that can help you forecast any data set, really. It doesn't have to be cost data. This, again, article, kind of your question, well, how do I want to go deep there. I'd like to learn more about that. Where do I get started? A member of our team published that. It goes into kind of detail about what's the benefits, detriments of each, which one you might want to use, and how you get started with setting it up. So that'll be in there too. And then I think, yeah, last bit is resources. So, I often say about what we do, it's definitely a journey, not a destination, right? Because just as soon as you feel like, oh, I've got all that stuff optimized, I went and dug in and used these tools and they're not showing anything anymore, so we're perfect. That's good in a static world, right? Where nothing changes. But just as soon as you've got something optimized, somebody else went and launched something in another account that's not optimized. So it's important to tap into some of these resources to know like what some of the latest tools are. And then to start kind of changing your mindset to like, what can I do to prevent people from doing bad behaviors? Or what can I do to educate them to have good behaviors, right? Because we can put policies and things in place to stop them from doing stuff. But do we want to slow down the business from being able to launch things? Frustrated developer because he can't do that thing that he's wanting to do because it's not the right thing to do. Whereas, there could be an element of education where we tell them, hey, here's what our business likes to do, and it saves the most money, where we teach them on the front end. So just start thinking about some of those mindsets, especially with the tools, because a lot of people don't know that these tools even exist. And a lot of them, as you heard, are free. They can go start using those, today, tomorrow. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Under AWS forecast, are there like created templates, menus for different industries?
It's not industry specific, so it's like a data set driven type tool. So you load a data set in, and then you pick parameters to forecast it out. So it doesn't really, it's kind of agnostic, right? It doesn't care what the data set is. It could be any industry. And that's that tool where you're starting to toe the line of getting into like SageMaker and some of like the big data tools.
Right.
Forecast did it in a way that makes it like easy and more like approachable for somebody that's just starting and that just wants to project data. So it'd be a good place to start if that's the type of thing that's interesting to your org. But yeah, you'll be super toeing the line for like all that big data, AI, ML stuff. Another useful Twitter handle, if you use Twitter, that our team made is this AWS Cost News bot. So they made it to where it goes out and, we publish a million news announcements, it feels like sometimes. And only a subset of those really involve like, could this save me money? Is this related to like cost optimization? So that bot automatically grabs just those things and publishes them on that Twitter handle. So if this is the world that you're in, you might want to go check that out. And I think that's, Twitch. So our team does a Twitch show once a week. We do it in seasons. It's called Keys to Optimization. You see a little bit down there at the bottom of the time it is. So it's on Twitch. And, we interview folks like Splunk and was on today show and talk to them about a little bit about what they're doing in that industry and what might be interesting to other customers. So if you haven't seen that, that's another, you can see all the replays and stuff on YouTube as well. So really valuable resources. We try to share as much of this knowledge as possible, especially things like this too, right? Because we want our customers to be more efficient, right? We want you to only, again, pay for what you're using, not for that extra stuff. Yeah. Sure.
Microsoft Azure, right? They come with this ChatGPT now. They are getting. They want to sell it. I can give you ChatGPT so and so. I'm going to give you some credits because I'm a non-profit. What do I do there? How do I get involved, or what's the services that I have to look at? I know there's AI, ML, I don't take
Yeah, I guess I couldn't really answer like what you should do for that. I know like inside of what I've seen happening in the AI ML space is that there's a lot of tools being offered by a lot of people, and that I can see that having the right data scientists that know how to use them and create something that's valuable to your business is going to be the most important part. Just having some, flashy thing that, is valuable or not now may be useful, but it may not, right? Like, and we need to know, does somebody know how to use it and use it in a way that's going to create something that's valuable to your business? And I've seen that a lot with our customers. They get into the SageMakers and they get into those tools and they're crunching their customers' data to surface interesting recommendations, whether you're flipping through to watch something on TV, or maybe if you're running a data set for, like law or some of these, or health or any of those things, maybe you can surface the customers that need to be checked on, right? Like they know like, hey, you haven't had an interaction with this person in a while, like you should reach out to them. So that's the part that is connecting the actual use case to what you need to do versus just a tool that, you could go type a question into and maybe you'll get the right answer, but maybe you won't. And oftentimes that difference is a data scientist, truly AI ML, and then tuning it for what you're trying to accomplish. So hope that's helpful.
Next month, we have Quantify speaking on ML on AWS.
There you go.
They were
Perfect.
the Machine Learning Partner of the Year for AWS.
So it sounds like, yeah, was it next week? Next month?
Next month.
Next month. So yeah, so there will be a specific machine learning. So that'll be your person to ask. That's totally not my world. I haven't really done much in it, but it's fascinating.
You gotta be careful too. What you're saying that we're going through another customer right now. We're doing the legals of it. Who owns the training data? Who owns
Sure.
the data that gets put into this? If you start training
Which government?
for your own business and your own model, you may be giving away your model.
Yeah, and I think something that's being touched on there is just be careful with your data, right? Especially your health law, some of these other things. Like, do you trust throwing it into a third-party tool, or do you want full control end-to-end of the analysis of that and what it outputs? And that could be a very important factor, especially in organizations that have higher regulation, right? So things to think about. Oh yeah, other questions? I mean, we got kind of a touch of time here left, and this is, I think, the last bit. I just got like kind of a thank you slide, but I'll leave this one because there's more useful data on it. But yeah, what else are some of the things that I guess, are important to your groups? What did you not hear today that you would love to hear more about? What else is interesting to you?
I've got a question. Obviously, tagging helps a lot of companies to charge back or show back.
Mhm.
How do you see companies handling things like egress costs, data transfer costs, those aggregate services that are servicing a large number of maybe workloads?
Sure. So the question is chargeback, showback. And how do we see companies handling that? And there's a couple different ways. One of the main ways that people do it with like savings plans and other stuff is they can do like what we call just a peanut butter spread. They'll take whatever it was savings wise, and then they'll spread it proportionately across those accounts according to their spend. That's like the generic way that a ton of accounting firms do. The more advanced way is, well, can I track or tie some kind of utilization metric to it? So I know that Jeff used 50% of it and Adam used 25. And that's where you get into tagging can help. Or if it's fronting an application, do we have a log that can tell how much each person is using? So that's kind of where it pivots to obviously more advanced. And that's where also a lot of companies start thinking about like application wise. Should I just be charging you like a set amount for the use of my service and not dealing with all the nickel and diming, right? Because that turns into with chargeback and showback, for those of you who don't know it, right? Showback is I'll show you your costs so that at least you understand them. Chargeback is not only am I going to show you, now they're hitting your bottom line, right? I'm charging you for them. That's super important to like big customers, but it can turn into like kind of catfighting if it's been things that they haven't otherwise paid for in the past. And then what about shared services, right? What if it's a centralized database of our customers that everybody has to read from? Like, do I want to charge you more because you use it the most? Maybe I want you using it the most because whatever we measure like is now going to be the outcome that we see. And if I start charging you for usage of it, maybe you're going to find a way to use it less. Maybe you're going to peel off some local copy of it and do your own reading of it, right? Like we got to know the behaviors we're wanting to create. So I know it's like kind of a weird, long, obscure answer to the question that you have, and it's again a business decision. But it's important to think about those things because as soon as you start doing something, people will behavior around it in a way.
I'll ask one more question. I'll turn it over
Yeah.
to other people. What is the one area that you would say, if there is one, that is commonly overlooked when you talk to customers? Is there one aspect of cost optimization where you think people are just not getting the message, or just something that seems to be easy to understand but often overlooked?
So the question is like, what do I see as the most overlooked? I'm going to kind of answer your question, but not. So it's not overlooked, but it's more of where I start with customers. And the journey is always one, visibility, because you got to understand what's going on. But that aside, on the savings front of it, I always start with the trusted advisor idle resources, because I don't want my customers paying for stuff that's probably not being used. And it finds things like idle load balancers, idle RDS. Even in Cost Explorer, the right sizing recommendations have idle EC2. So it's instances that have been less than 1% max CPU over 14 days. There's a good chance that that's an unused instance. Similarly, it finds underutilized EBS, which is EBS that has had either no like under 1 MB connections in the last 14 days or is unattached, right? So it's not even attached to an instance. So these are the types of things that I'm like, okay, if you want to start on that journey, the easiest big lever to pull is commitment. Get a savings plan, get an RI, do whatever. That's super easy. That's the easy button, boom, you got it, you're getting savings. And now I want to go, okay, what's step 2? Tackle that idle stuff, right? That's a great next place. And you say, oh, what's step 3? That's when I start thinking maybe like right sizing some of the stuff that's out there, or moving it to Graviton, or some of like the compute world where let's get it into the right bucket. And then there are, depending on the service you use, there's a million other kind of optimizations inside of those.
I think benchmarking is an important aspect of that, as opposed to assuming, I just need to scale horizontally, or I'm better off scaling vertically, but actually having taken the time to go ahead and try different sizes, and try different vertical or horizontal scaling options, and find out which is the most cost effective before you.
Yeah, and that's the whole horizontal vertical scaling philosophy. That's right. That's kind of the old way of thinking, right? Do we just take that server that's out there and make it bigger? Well, you can do that, but that you can't do dynamically, right? You're gonna have to downtime that server, resize it to something bigger, and turn it back on. Well, that doesn't make sense. What makes sense is let's pick a smaller instance that's reasonable. Let's set up an auto scaling group, and let's say when this thing hits 80% CPU, launch a second one and let it start helping serve traffic. Then when they both are at 80%, launch another one. And that's that whole scale in and out thing that I talked about earlier. That's the, the difference in kind of going vertical, horizontal. And I might have said those backwards earlier, but we want to go horizontal where we get more instances instead of vertical where we're getting a larger or smaller instance. And that's the true ways of designing stuff to save money. A little more complicated on the front end, but way better performance, right? We're going to serve our customers and meet them where they are with the right amount of capacity, rather than having to like go shut it down or have that, poor dev or somebody support guy get paged in the middle of the night because the server's fallen over, right? Like that's not what we want. So that's things to think about. I know we're pretty well at time. Any other questions before I turn it over to grab the raffle deal here?
I hear a lot of confusion because how much serverless, what does AWS provide as a cost?
A bunch, depending on the one. Like serverless with Lambda, for example, is also covered as part of our savings plans. We've introduced some different tiered pricing for Lambda that saves. And then really it's also right sizing, right, is another example of Lambda. If you picked, a memory size that's too large to get more CPU, it might, take longer to run, and you're paying for this really, really large Lambda that doesn't need to be that big. So, but in general, serverless is the optimization to standard EC2, right? Because now you've gone from a pay per hour model to a pay per request or some other model. So when a workload can be moved to that, that's the direction you ultimately want to go. So, less optimization opportunities, of course, because it's already really lean, but they're still there depending on the service. Okay. Right, but that equivalent might have been 100 million on EC2, right?
We were trying to figure out what to do with that $9 billion, how to save it.
Hmm.
And we were trying to turn on, but we didn't find so much.
There's definitely opportunities there, and feel free. I don't remember if I put it up here. I'll grab it real quick. Feel free to message me, and we'll make sure to involve your TAM in some of those conversations. Here, I'll grab it real quick. Again, I'll drop this in the chat as well. Let me go to the next slide. Oh, I didn't include it. Sorry. I'll drop it in the chat with my email so that you can reach out. I want to keep the dialogue going with this group, local to the area. So I'd like to be a resource kind of for all of you. It sounds like, you've already working with your AWS counterparts, but, we've got specialists like myself and Bhavik kind of across the inside of AWS. And if the team that you're working with doesn't know the answer, I'd like to at least reach out to them kind of on your behalf and connect them with people that do know some of those answers and that can help them. So yeah, if you're not on the Slack, jump on it. I'll probably tomorrow morning, I'll throw the slide deck in there with my email address. Is there any optimization on what? So when it comes to VPNs or WAF, then you get into data transfer conversations. And most of the optimizations around those are architectural, right? Is it going out to the internet instead of through a endpoint? Or is it being served through CloudFront instead of directly out of an S3 bucket? Depending on what's happening there. But if it's straight up a VPN tunnel, how do you optimize that? There's not really much you can do, right? You stand up the tunnel, you pay per hour, you pay per gig. Really all you can analyze at that point is the amount of gigs I'm sending through this the right amount, right? Does it really all that data need to go through there, or can some of it be going directly to the service instead of through the tunnel, or directly out to the internet instead of through the tunnel? That's largely architecture conversations at that point. I'm not aware of a scheduler on that, but I don't see why something couldn't be scripted to, if you have the ability to turn down the tunnel. I don't know many orgs that do, right? Mostly when they have a VPN tunnel, they need it up 24/7. But if in your case it is something that is only used during certain times of the day, then I don't see why it couldn't be torn down at certain points, script wise, and then turned back on. Should be doable with the right, Lambda script or something else. Oh, yeah, and that's a great point, right? And that's something to think about. What is that VPN serving, right? Is it talking to a database or something that's on-prem? Well, what if could that be moved to AWS and just negate the need for that VPN even existing in the first place? Maybe, right? And again, that's architectural conversations and possibly migration, conversations. So that's the one things you want to think big about sometimes is Like not how can I tweak what's there, is maybe why am I even doing it this way in the first place? Is there a better way to do this in general? And sometimes that can unlock new ways to think about it. Sometimes it doesn't, but depending on the requirement.
Put you on the spot, anything new that we look forward to FinOps? What's coming up in the next 3 months?
There's always new stuff, and that's why I said follow that Twitter handle, because half the time I don't even know about it until it's come out. And when,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some NBA stuff. That's what
Right.
it is.
yeah, but I mean, oftentimes I see the news announcements come out about the same time as everybody else in this room does, and then the first thing I do is I'll go read and find out, like, okay, what's the real application of this? What's it going to change? And can I go start like talking to some of my customers about it? So, I don't have like a ton of like roadmap stuff. I'm not the service team. And as you've seen today, there's a ton of stuff that a lot of people already don't know about and they should be using. So, start there, and then we'll peel the onion after that. But yeah, that's what I got for you there. What else?
Hour went by fast. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, happy to be here. Appreciate your time. And then would you like the mic to do your raffle?